My name is Veronica Lloyd. I am an assistant professor of criminology at the Willem Pompe Institute at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And I have the pleasure to chair this session today on, I think, one of the most exciting topics of this conference. What is the role of technology in combating organized crime? And I think we have quite interesting and exciting research presentations today. Unfortunately, Andre is unable to join us as the first speaker, so we have two papers for this session, so we have plenty of time for questions and discussions. I would like to ask two things what most of you probably know. If you have any questions or comments, please share it in the chat that I can echo it for our speakers and those in YouTube who attend our session online. And also, if you have any specific questions for the speakers, we will take the questions per paper. So after Heledit finished, we will take the questions for her presentation, and then we start the second presentation, and we will ask you to share your questions and comments on the second presentations in the meantime, and then we will discuss them after the presentation of Carlotta, who is here also on behalf of the colleagues and authors of this paper. You are all muted. We have a little bit shorter time than the rest of the panels due to the closing video remark, but I think we have still plenty of time to discuss the topic we share today in this very exciting panel. So let me start directly with the introduction of I think a very kind colleague of mine I missed a lot, and it's a pity that we just see each other again online, Heledit Ravnholm, who is a consultant and an anthropologist also by training and an independent researcher, who is also working on various issues related to minority inclusion, innovation, and crime. And her particular research interest is an intersection of technology, minorities, and crime and identity, and material cultures in particular, as well as human-animal relations. And today she has a very exciting paper on illicit weapons. I think many of us are quite curious how they are made, so she can elaborate on some issues regarding the presence of 3D printed weapons in case studies based on her work in Canada and France. Heledit, thank you for coming and sharing your PowerPoint with us. I'm gonna mute myself and I will keep an eye on the questions. Please start your presentation.
Well, first of all, it's lovely to be here and thank you for having me. Let me just go to my presentation. Obviously, we're at the last. You get a spoiler already. You get the end before you get everything else. Let's do this. Okay, so because there were supposed to be more papers, I am going to elaborate a little bit more than I actually put in my talk. We were supposed to have 10 minutes each, and now we have a lot more. I am an anthropologist. I am not a weapons specialist, so I am going to try to do my best to do justice to Veronica's description of my talk. But it's going to be a little bit more anthropological than actually weapons specialized. Now, when it comes to looking at how we have to combat organized crime or any other crime, we have to look at what we're actually combating in the first place. And part of that problem are actually illicit weapons. Now, illicit weapons trade in general is a global and local problem that impacts us all in some way. Whether we're a minority member in a time and place where violence and hate crimes are on the rise, a person living in a high crime neighborhood, someone living in a community that's facing rising pre-conflict or post-conflict or actual armed conflict violence, things always go from bad to worse when weapons are involved. And weapons, especially firearms, are a large part of the problems that we actually face with crime as well. So as an anthropologist, my interest in illicit weapons trade stems from the interest in observations of social and cultural behaviors predominantly, in particular where vulnerable minorities are concerned. And part of that is because minorities very often do not get the same treatment as everybody else And obviously, this has led me on an ongoing independent research project on illicit weapons, and in particular, the presence of and impact of technological advances on them, in particularly in 3D printed weapons. I'll be talking about the presence of such weapons in case studies of Canada and France today. That said, this is a huge topic, and as these weapons are actually becoming more and more widely spread, every country in the world should probably be studied, which obviously I haven't done thus far, but it's definitely something to consider. Now, why Canada and France? Firstly, I live in France at present, and currently crime is on the rise in many French cities, including organized crime, in particular in Marseille. I also have a bit of a personal connection because my wife spent her childhood in Marseille, which offers me a very unique time capsule of sorts. And for an anthropologist, we talk to people. And the whole point of talking to people is you need to know who to talk to. Because she has actually lived there, she knows people who still live in the city, which gives me an in. It's not much, but it's a start. And obviously, they can also tell me what the time was like before, what was a safe neighborhood, what wasn't a safe neighborhood, and how this has actually changed. Obviously, in Marseille, as we probably know, gang violence in particular has become endemic, and it is spiraling out of control, leading to serious loss of life. The city's underbelly is also, from what I know, a long-standing part of transnational organized criminal networks, something that other colleagues here probably know way better than I do. And obviously, that makes the situation harder still. Deep Dive has a very good episode on the topic, so I would recommend everybody listen to the podcast if you haven't yet. In case of Canada, my interests have to do with the proximity to the US. Now, US is plagued by a large portion of illicit weapons trade due to weapons owning and use being more often than not legal. It's relatively easy to get to weapons, which is what creates this impact. And unlike Mexico, where cartels are very well present, Canada is generally presented as a country more in control of its organized crime and violence. And that's what makes it such an interesting, contrasting study, obviously, with US, with Mexico. Of course, with US being an influence, a huge influence, and also, in a way, an accidental exporter of a lot of ideology that is involved in some parts of distribution of especially 3D weapons, we can't completely avoid looking at US, but it makes for an interesting contrast. So let's focus very briefly on the reporting and on some of the facts. Now, presence of technology and high technology weapons is on the rise. We have seen them in conflict, for instance. Drones at this point have become a staple. And that means the illicit market is arguably changing as well. So from drones to 3D printed weapons, tech weapons, for lack of a better phrase, have a growing presence, not only in ideological camps like we have seen a few years ago when, for instance, 3D weapons were predominantly found there, but they are also finding their way into armed conflict among organized crime members such as gangs. And of course, terrorism is still a staple. To my knowledge, Islamic terrorism is still not using 3D weapons much. I only found one mention of potential use in one study that I looked at. They are connected, however, with white supremacist groups. Obviously, that said, it's not impossible that this use with Islamic terrorists, it could also just be a matter of time. 3D guns, either way, are finding their way onto every continent, into various criminal contexts, and they are definitely getting, should we say, popular, because they're also relatively easy to obtain and they can be hard to trace. For people who are trying to look at online trade in itself, one thing can actually, I can already mention that, pose a very interesting problem. Are we talking about a gun that's actually meant to shoot, or is it just a replica? Can you use this replica? How can you use it? Can you convert it? So basically, this is not something I can really comment on as an anthropologist. It needs a weapons specialist, but it is something that has definitely been on my mind when I was doing this research. Now, at this stage of research, I'm focusing on several questions. What weapons are used in general and otherwise? Who is using them? Gangs, traditional organized crime, terrorists, radicalized lone wolves, and so forth. How are they using them? Are they predominantly, for instance, with 3D printed weapons, selling plans and parts or complete weapons? Are they used for practical, should we say, daily crime? This is not a very good phrase, but it does convey the meaning of, this is not a specialist. There's no ideology attached. For instance, it's just an armed robbery. Or perhaps there are more likely to be specific crimes, such as ideology-based terrorism. Or, and this is the thing that's really interesting for me, are they particularly used for owning? So showing identity through, for instance, online posing, which is quite a thing with a lot of the people who do own them. Now, also the question there, what percentage is fully illicit? What percentage of all guns is 3D printed and what is not? What does illicit even mean? And this is an interesting question because in what is this normally what we consider illicit trade to be, or are there loopholes? And in the question of 3D printed weapons, I have actually found an amicus brief from US that was discussing that there is in fact a legal gray zone, basically loophole that people are using for owning. Of course, obviously, always back to the question also of does identity or ideology, and is the ideology the only identity matter? And if so, why? This is a huge topic. And obviously, I'm working very slowly on several reports that will detail each stage of my research to present. It's going slowly because all research goes slowly. Today, I obviously have to be a bit more brief. So we're going to be looking more, just at the specifics. The statistically, quote unquote, traditional weapons. So weapons, for instance, that have been found in illicit trade more traditionally, are actually still the vast majority of illicit weapons, which makes sense. They are already there. They are already available. And that said, 3D printing does seem to be getting popular despite that in various spaces, which I think is actually telling. We have seen, for instance, use in Myanmar with rebel groups against the military takeover. We have seen use with gangs and radicalized lone wolf terrorists, as well as organized hate groups and hate groups that intersect with organized crime. They have popped up with all terrorist groups, such as the IRA. I specifically found a mention of a funeral in which people, masked men, have actually posed with the weapons, and they are obviously also extra popular with ex-convicts who aren't allowed a weapon, and with minors, which is very worrying, who legally cannot own a weapon at all. There was a recent arrest of a trafficking ring in the US that connected organized hate group, which I have previously discussed on this conference, as a form of organized crime with a twist, if you wish, with drugs and weapons, among which were also 3D and other ghost guns. I'll add here, when it comes to ghost guns, I've seen varied applications of the term. Sometimes ghost guns is used to specifically discuss 3D printed weapons, and at other times, it also means other types of small weapons that have been made hard to trace. So this can be a bit confusing, especially for me, because it can be less clear which weapon type we're talking about. And I wish I had a colleague who, for instance, specialized in this, so I could consult them on this topic. Now, I'm currently unable to confirm if traditional style organized crimes like mafias are actually using them as well. So if any of you are researching that and have information, please email me. I would love to know. 3D printed weapons also made it into Geneva Peace Week conference this last month. So basically, the problem is growing to the point where this is being discussed there. A few words on the methodology, because I'm an independent researcher. I normally work from published sources for safety and from whatever I can find of, people who are actually living in the spaces. I have also found myself near sites devoted to printing and owning. What was sobering, however, is how easy it was to actually get to that. I did not look for these sites. I was directed by Google because I was initially looking for academic and news reports, and I literally found myself directed to these forums. So if I was interested in buying, it would have likely been possible. On the matter of discussing illicitness of use, I think it's important to remember that in general, for most countries, and from what I know for Europe, 3D printed weapons and other ghost guns are by nature illicit. Or, for instance, in the US, as I mentioned, rely on a loophole for temporary legality or partial legality. And for many, that's the point, especially for ideological groups that I've looked at, but also probably for anyone who is interested in not having a paper trail. Circumventing the official legal ownership channels is what makes these weapons so interesting. And of course, the lack of being able to track them down or very reduced tracing makes them appealing because they make crime investigation so much harder. While practical use is definitely part of what these guns are used for, a certain amount of people do seem to want them for identity purposes. Posing on the internet, for instance, to showcase who you are, what you believe in, seems to be a big part of it. Now, whether or not these people will at some point also commit a crime is beyond the scope of this discussion right now. But overall, while identity is definitely still a part of ownership, and I dare say for everyone, as we see gangs and organized crime and terrorists bank hugely on identity to recruit, I think that practical application might slowly become the dominant reason to use a 3D firearm. However, given the identity of being a gang member, being a member of organized crime, and the point in a way of recruiting through showcasing who you are, who you can be, I think this is actually the point where these matters actually still collide. So let's briefly look at how the countries I specifically looked at do media reporting on the matter. Now, why is this important in the first place? Both organized crime and any radical group, as I've already said, rely on recruitment to stay relevant. While recruitment can be forcible, the easiest recruitment can literally just be tempting people over with a promise of something. This can be money, it can be power, it can be an ideological reward, it can even be inject violence. And prevention is down to public and domestic discussion of the issue, as well as obviously with policing, which all need good factual reporting behind it. We cannot have these debates without reporting, without awareness of the public. Now, I would argue that over-reporting and fear focus can cause negative effects, but so does under-reporting, because people aren't aware. Arguably, under-reporting actually benefits organized crime and other bad actors, because it will still be easy for those actors to do their quote-unquote work and especially recruit. And while the public is impacted, they may not be aware of potential dangers. So, for instance, if I take an impressionable youth from a vulnerable, traditionally underserved community as a possible example, and there is research to support that we need to worry about recruitment from these type of communities, from these type of children, if you want, you may literally have someone seeing internet content from gang members boasting of a rich lifestyle while his family is struggling. He's got very real problems to consider. And obviously, if the parents, teachers, and others aren't aware that a discussion should be happening on this public, this leaves this person arguably far, far more easily recruited than he should be. I think it's also easier for especially youths and even young children. I have seen reports, for instance, on misogyny, violent misogyny in British schools and elsewhere. The ideas are growing, and they're actually endemic to these young populations that are growing up on the internet. And very often the discussion isn't present at home, from what I've actually seen. So contrastingly from US, for instance, to Canada, in Canada, reporting is relatively common. It is pretty well balanced. I did not have a feeling that panic was generally aimed for by journalists. Contrastingly, because obviously we cannot completely evade US, there the discussion is far more visceral and it's often far more worried, but that does make sense to a certain extent in light of frequent mass and other shootings. Canadian reporting focuses on who is found owning these weapons, order threats in general or in specific, production of weapons as a generality, what the police response was, but also, and I think this is very important when it comes to recruiting, the community response, how the community is looking at this, how people should potentially be discussing this. Now, interestingly, when it comes to France, reporting is almost non-existent in comparison. My French is not the best. I'm going to be first to admit that. So I'm a little crippled, but my wife serves as a co-researcher when I need someone who speaks fluent French. So we have looked through as much content as we could find. It has been limited to only a handful of reports on the topic, predominantly reports on successful arrests. Now, so far, of course, my research is still ongoing. It has also been much, much harder to find publicly available professional data of any kind on the topic, at least at present for France. And comparing, obviously, to that, US, UK have been very good sources. Canada has been a very good source, with one exception. The RCMP site, last I looked at, was at the start of this month, did lack the sources related to weapons trade. Maybe they've updated it since, but that was surprising to me, especially given the reporting that is in a way so open. One possible reason for France may be search words not matching the content enough, but obviously I can't currently confirm this. In France, what I am definitely missing and what I'm getting from people I do talk to is the broader discussion of the issue is absent. Either I haven't come across it, for instance, for public, apart from the people I've spoken to, or it is simply not there. My next step is going to be to further explore these questions, especially where identity and recruitment are concerned, practical use as well, how these things may differ for organized crime, for instance, gangs, versus radicalized individuals. At present, this is where we probably can end this presentation. So it's a big to be continued. One thing I will note as well, basically, is that I do hope to talk to the authorities themselves. this would be for me a very, very useful attempt to consider, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be successful. But as an independent, that's sometimes very, very hard to do. I have actually contacted in previous months, and I have not, for instance, had even a response sometimes. So to be continued. Thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Judith, for the very interesting comparison you shared with us. I would like to ask the audience, would you mind to share your comments and questions with us in the chat so I can reflect on your interpretation? And in the meanwhile, while we are waiting for this, and I can imagine that everybody is tired. I have also, I made it quite late in the last panels as well, so it was quite a challenging 24 hours. But still, I think one of the most interesting aspects of this kind of technologies is, and I think there are also a very kind colleague of mine, Kirsten, who is doing the very nice project leading on firearms and what does it mean to us for firearms.
Yeah.
That we have always this assumption that this is always developed with the intention of homicide, violence. So there is this connotation of threat and danger. While in other anthropological concepts, we are much more interested in also the social symbolic values of this kind of item. So when we talk about this organized crime and the traditional conceptualization of organized crime networks, I think it's also interesting to look at how, compared to traditional weapons and the weight of traditional weapons and the branding of traditional weapons, is replaced or compete with these kind of new, relatively dummy, very technically minimalistic ways of printing weapons. And if you have any reflections on that, maybe how this kind of symbolic power is changing in terms
where to start. Yeah, I definitely agree with you that there is definitely this dualism. I mean, for me as a minority member, I am very aware of the potentials, even just from the terrorism that is most often associated with the whole situation. And, that does give me a very specific perspective, which could interfere. I try my best not to stay open-minded. And I do see a lot of people discuss more just opposing. But while I definitely think that symbolic posing is definitely a huge part of it, for me, from everything I've read thus far, I would say the biggest problem is that we can't tell. With a lot of these weapons, we can't tell. Is this weapon is it actually functional? Is it going to be functional in a way that's actually dangerous? Because not all of them actually really work. Is it going to be converted at some point? Is there another one? And in a way, that's the crux of the issue of all illicit trade in weapons. Because the reason people have weapons, that can vary. It can vary from someone's really enthusiastic about guns, someone's very interested in guns, someone in post-war context, I have actually spoken to veterans who took their arms back, who literally, and I think we are actually facing this potentially in Ukraine now. I believe there has been a discussion on this. And the question is, where are these weapons coming from? What safety procedures are employed? And obviously also, we need to know that they are there. Because when a crime does happen, first of all, personally, I'm an idealist, I suppose. I would love to live in a world where crime would be preventable 100%. Not possible, but at the least what we can do is prevent as much as possible. So to me, I see weapons the way I see cars. You have to have a license, you have to know what you're doing. And I think, especially if we consider traditional making of weapons in certain spaces, I think Austria has some, Africa I know has some traditional makers. These are parts of societies, of cultures that has been argued, I believe, in state, but there's been a big argument about that, whether or not these can actually be. I believe the amicus brief actually that I studied lately has actually said that this is like saying that artisanal creation of furniture is alike to someone just buying a kit from IKEA. So that was pretty rough. But I do understand what both sides are talking about in a way. I do see the perceptions of how people make things change, but I definitely also think that safety, no matter who you are, no matter what your intentions are, should be paramount to everybody. So that's in a way my not so perfect answer, because there are no perfect answers for this, I find. But
we can talk about it, I think, also
forever.
later on. Let me just share another question with you from Liz Carrillo, who sent in the chat. Thank you. This is a very interesting subject, and I would like to ask, who is behind the technical part of building these systems, and are criminals engaging with tech people to work on this, or they are learning directly about this? And what's your opinion on this? Thank you very much, Lee.
Okay, this one is an exciting one because I think that really what we initially have always thought about for the last few years has been that it's generally groups who are opposing or groups who have an ideological connection with. But yes, I have found data on criminals actually engaging, on people selling these weapons. And one of the arrests I mentioned was an arrest of a criminal network in France, and another arrest actually happened recently in US. I have contacted, but I haven't come back yet, so we'll see what happens, where 3D printed weapons have definitely been found. What I don't know about that particular case is, were they producing them 100% or were they just trafficking them? I have also come across data that suggests that weapons and weapons parts are being trafficked to Caribbean, but that there are also local criminals actually crafting their own. And again, this is also where a very interesting question with cybercrime comes in. What is trafficking? What is illicit trade? How does sharing of plans feature on internet, especially where you don't necessarily know who you are actually selling it to or sharing it to? So I think this is, again, not a perfect answer, but from what we can see, yes, I do believe that criminals are making them themselves. It's not hard, apparently. I don't know. I'm a complete tech failure, so I can't actually tell you. I doubt that I would be able to produce one. But yeah, it does seem to be very, very possible to produce them, that there are actually literally, should we say, weaponsmiths out there who are producing them for criminal purposes, not just for ideological purposes, whether criminal or otherwise, and that they are being also trafficked at the same time. So I've got a humongous list of research. If anybody's interested, I can actually, I did not include this because otherwise everything would be unreadable. But if anybody's interested, I am very, very happy to share what I have. So yeah. Oh,
I had more time. Thank you very much. I think that there is a new field opening up soon in criminology, focusing generally on this particular stakeholder group, what has been just mentioned in this chat. Is there any other comment or question you would like to share out there?
Can I just add very quickly that anybody who's interested in how, for instance, from US and otherwise, you can actually see these criminals use it, look up straw purchasing, which was a new one for me this year. I did not know about this before, but straw purchasing does seem to be a big thing. And it's actually using people who are allowed to own weapons to essentially siphon these weapons elsewhere. So I nearly forgot about that, but I remember in time.
Well, thank you very, very much, Halidit. I really appreciate your work, and it was a lovely presentation. I think quite inspiring also how many angles to explore on this field. And then I really need to jump to the next present, who is Carlotta Carbone. Thank you very much for joining us, Carlotta.
Thank you.
Are also here on behalf of Teoni Spati from the Center for Research and Technology at Hellas, and Esponia Torsoko, I think, if I pronounce it correctly. And you come from my beloved Milan, so I'm very grateful to see you here. Carlotta is a researcher at the transcrime team at the University of Cattolica del Sacro Cuore of Milan. I think that's how you kind of pronounce it.
Yeah.
And you graduated also in criminology a few years ago, and you're specialized in security policies from the same university as you graduated previously. So the focus of Carlotta's personal research interest is trafficking of human beings, corruption, and collusion in public procurement. And today she's going to present a very exciting project as a co-author on the dynamics of trafficking in human beings in relation to technologies from a European perspective. And Carlotta, thank you very much for sharing this project with us, and I'm quite looking forward to learn more about this. And please, if you have questions, feel free to share in the chat from the audience.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing the screen. Let me know if you are able to see it. Do you see the screen? Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for the presentation. So as you correctly mentioned, today I would like to do a presentation on trafficking in human beings, presenting the initial results of a very interesting project we have been working on since 1 year, more or less, which is called the Vanguard Project. So in this presentation, I would like to start with a very brief overview of the project. Then I would like to go deeper in the initial findings we had gathered on an empirical research we are conducting. And I would like also to conclude with a brief overview of the technological solutions we are developing in our project. So first of all, what is Vanguard Project? Vanguard Project is a 3-year project funded under the program Horizon Europe. It started in November 23 and it will last until October 26. It is coordinated by CERT. Unfortunately, my colleagues from CERT are not here, but if you have any question more general on the project, you can reach out to me, or I can also redirect to them in case of any curiosity. We are a consortium of 22 different partners, including law enforcement agencies, border guards, NGOs, academia, and technological partners. All of us are useful for, let's say, going on with a specific task in the project. The main aim is very general aim of the project is to strengthen the fight against trafficking in human beings, integrating advanced technological solutions. More specifically, I would say there are 2 strands of the projects. One is more research focused and aims at improving the intelligence picture on THB. So we have we know a lot about THB, but we are still missing some more details on the modus operandi of criminals, on vulnerabilities, protective factors of victims and perpetrators, what happens across the different stages of THB. So we want to gather a deeper knowledge and understand how trafficking chains work, especially in the last period compared to the past. On the other side, what we are aiming also to do in our project is to develop a suite of tools for the detection, identification, and prevention of THB. So these 2 strands, let's say these 2 souls of the projects, are connected to each other. So research is supporting technology and vice versa. So I also reported the website in case anyone is interested. Now I would like to present the empirical research. So basically we are conducting, I would like to, before to do a brief overview on trafficking in human beings. Maybe most of the participants here already have information on this phenomenon, but just to have a very general overview of the phenomenon to set the stage about what we are talking about. So trafficking of human beings is occurring in many different forms. We know that sexual and labor exploitation are the most prevalent forms of THB at the global level, actually also at the European level. There are many other forms of THB that are kind of understudied. First of all, because there are no consistent data, because they are apparently less prevalent. Probably they are really less prevalent, but still we are, let's say, basing all our consideration on available data that are based on identified victims. And we know that this phenomenon has a very high dark number. So many of the victims are not identified, as also accounted by numerous international organizations making estimations on the real scope of this phenomenon. So there are many other forms, including trafficking in organ trafficking, for example, forced marriage, surrogacy, for example. This is a new form of THB, which has been also included in the new directive in this year in July. So there are many other forms. It is a global phenomenon. So in our project, we are focusing on European Union, since Horizon Europe with the funding, but this is a global phenomenon, and it happens very frequently that some of the stages of THB occurs in many different countries. So maybe only one part of this is occurring in Europe, and the others are occurring in all over in the world. If we include the recruitment, transportation, exploitation, victim disposal, or reinvestment of criminal proceeds. In terms of, what is the scale of human trafficking? One of the most recent estimates provided by the International Labour Organization said that almost 50 million of individuals worldwide are subjected to modern slavery on any given day in 2021, which is a very huge number. This is obviously an estimation. This is not this doesn't correspond to the identified victim, but is an estimate. In terms of profit, we know that is a very lucrative criminal activity. Annually at the global level, 236 billion illegal profits are made out of sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, begging, and forced criminality, which are, let's say, the most prevalent forms, or most known forms of THB. While at the European Union, we don't have many structured data, unfortunately. We do know that in 2022, we were able to identify in the whole European Union 10,000 victims of THB, most of them for sex and labor trafficking. This is the highest number of victims identified since 2008. So this is something on which we decided to work more on. What we decided to study, I would like to present a part of the study we are conducting. So we are conducting an empirical research that have different objectives. I would like to focus on one of them, which is the identification of vulnerabilities and protective factors of victims and perpetrators involved in human trafficking. In this study, we focused on sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and forced criminality, which are the forms of THB covered in the overall project. First of all, what do we mean by vulnerabilities and protective factors, and why are we studying them? To give you a context. Vulnerabilities, what we mean for vulnerabilities is we mean all the factors that make a person to be more likely to be involved in THB. So for what concerns the victims, all the factors that make the victims more likely to be recruited in the first place on the one side, but also that make them more difficult to exit from trafficking once they are recruited. So here we are looking to both vulnerabilities that are active, let's say in the recruitment phase, but also in the exploitation phase. And this can be sometimes overlapping, but there are also some differences. In terms of, for what concerns perpetrators, vulnerabilities are all those factors that lead individuals to join a criminal network, to be involved in this kind of crime. What we call protective factor in this case is all the factors that help individuals to exit human trafficking, and this is valid for both victims and perpetrators. While we are studying this, actually there is a huge, let's say, relatively huge literature on vulnerabilities related to the victims. So we have identified by doing a first literature review a great amount of factors, both at like personal level, situational, or contextual factors. For example, we have found that being a woman, being part of minority, being a migrant, being illegal in a territory increase the likelihood of being recruited in THB and make also more difficult for them to exit. Or, for example, living in a country with a high level of corruption or with a very high likelihood of natural disasters or other forms of, for example, wars or other negative events also increase this likelihood. So we have collected many different factors, while for what concerns perpetrators, the literature is very scant. We have found something especially connected to the fact that individuals are likely to join criminal networks involved in THB if they were already, for example, if they lived in a family who had links with organized crime or human trafficking networks, or, for example, if they have been exploited before. But let's say there is not much research on that. So this is what we would like to do. And also in terms of protective factors, on the literature, there is much more attention on the vulnerabilities, while much less on protective factors. And we also think it would be very important to, let's say, pay much more attention to the protective factors in order to help victims to escape. So try to understand what helped the victims to exit human trafficking situations and try to make more available these tools in order to help them to exit human trafficking. And there is basically almost no research on protective factors related to perpetrators. So this is the context. So what we have done so far, how we think to carry out this study, we have been conducting semi-structured interviews with 3 typologies of stakeholders, experts in general, so including law enforcement agencies, border guards, policymakers, and potentially others, victims of THB, and perpetrators. So far, so we have conducted many different interviews. We have started since very few months. So here in the table, you can see the number of interviews that for now we have conducted and analyzed, and so on which I would like to discuss and present the results. So 4 interviews with experts, 2 with victims, and 5 with perpetrators. For what concerns the first category, we found experts on sexual and labor exploitation, while victims and perpetrators that we interviewed so far were involved in sexual exploitation. So obviously the research is now going on. So it's still ongoing. So in the next weeks and months, we aim to enlarge the scope of the interviews, also involving experts, victims, and perpetrators involved in other forms of THP, not just sex trafficking. But this is, let's say, the starting point. So I would like to start with the factors that drive victims to get involved in THP. So the vulnerabilities related to the recruitment stage, let's say. We found some factors. Many of these factors are well known also from the literature. So we found a confirmation, and some of them are straightforward. So we'll try to focus a bit more on those that are less straightforward, or on which we have found some interesting, let's say, information. Poverty is obviously a very straightforward factor. So victims, so many individuals coming from poor countries are attracted by the possibility of making easy money and escape from poverty situations. Obviously, we have found that in many of these cases, the family plays a role. So trying to encouraging the kids and the daughters to live in order to earn money. Often the family is totally unaware of what kind of activities their kids will be doing once in the country of exploitation, of destination for them. But there are also cases in which the family is aware of that, and this is another risk factor. Beyond that, we also find another factor, which is the lack of educational opportunities, personal and professional development, which is kind of different from the first one, because it's something that is not simply driven by poverty. Also, from the interviews with the victims, we found that some of them are looking for just a better future. So they start their journey. They decide to get to Europe because they want to study, they want to grow professionally, they want to find a job, even though they were not escaping from a situation of extreme poverty in their countries of origin. So it's also important to recognize that. And not just stick to the, let's say, to the picture of victims only escaping from poverty, because I think that also, in terms of discussion on the topic, it's important to identify all the factors and not just stick to, not stereotypical, because it's a true factor, but to have like a wider view on all the issues that are on the table in this moment. What we found is here interesting, according to me, is that this is emerged especially from the interviews we conducted with the perpetrators. The perpetrators were all male individuals involved in sex trafficking, and who adopted the lover boy method as a strategy to recruit victims, that basically consists in adopting manipulating strategies for making the victims falling in love with them. And this is a very, let's say, frequent method used by traffickers that also help them to avoid to use physical violence. So they just use psychological violence, manipulation, and in order to make victims totally dependent psychologically on them. And the perpetrators we interviewed told us that according to them, and it's important to say according to them because it's also a matter of perspectives, according to them, some of the victims were particularly, the victims that they exploited, were particularly attracted by having a luxurious life. So this is what they have in their mind. And they told us, and this is quite interesting, that they chose the victims based on that. So they basically used social media to recruit victims, and they selected girls who were showing off the willingness of luxurious life more in general. So, for example, if some girls posted the images of I don't know, very rich parties or parties on the boat or jewels or anything which can be connected to a luxurious life, they targeted those kind of girls. So this is quite interesting because it also opened the perspective on something which is not really discussed in this field. That's my perception. The other factors are quite straightforward. So, for example, the death of parents, family members, having a weak relational network, straightforward but extremely important, because the more you are isolated, the more you are potential victim of human trafficking. Lack of awareness about the activities they will be doing. And this is something which is quite sad but true. There are many cases in which girls, but also men, because it's not just a girl, a female issue, decide to leave for Europe and they are totally unaware of the activities they will be doing, or at least many, in most of the cases, they have just partial information. So they know, for example, one police officer from Spain told us that many of the victims he rescued had just partial information. They knew that they could have worked in the administrative sector, very generally speaking, or in the cleaning sector, but they didn't have any detail on the specific work, contract, and so on. Lack of knowledge on THB, this seems very trivial, but according to me, it's quite interesting. One of the victims, as a report in this quote, told us that before coming to Europe, she didn't have any information about THB. She didn't really know these kind of situations existed until she got here. And this is something which is very important for all the people like us, but also especially for policymakers and law enforcement to know that. So to know how much raising awareness on these issues is extremely important, especially in the countries of origin, but also in the countries of exploitation. Having been exploited in the past is obviously a risk factor. Lack of trust in police. This is we have noticed that both in the country of origin and in the country of exploitation, and we think they are also connected to each other. Some of the victims do not trust police in their countries because police in many of the countries they come from are particularly corrupt, or they use also violence on them, or in some cases on minorities. So they don't trust police. In some cases, they had bad experiences, or their family or acquaintances have had very bad experiences. And finally, this is another factor which I think is interesting, that we call the travel, vacation, get out of routine. In the interviews we made with the victims, both of them told us, and this is kind of connected to the second factor, both of them told us that they didn't escape from poverty. So they lived in a situation which was quite good in terms of family. They got along with their family. They had friends. They had kind of work in their country of origin. But what they want to do was just to travel, to have vacation, to get out of routine. This is something which according to me is interesting, because it's showing that these girls were just wanted to explore the world, to have experiences as much as we do in our countries. And this is considered a vulnerability because it's done without being aware of what they will be doing in the country of destination. So that's the problem is the connection between the two factors, not the willingness to travel itself. And also I mentioned peer influence because in one of the cases, the victim told us that she already had a friend in Spain. She was from one African country. She was contacted by her friend in Spain, and the friend told her, you can come here. Don't worry, there is job for you. I'm making a lot of money. We can travel, we can buy clothes. So she tried to influence her friend. Actually, only afterwards she discovered that her friend was obliged by the traffickers to convince her friend. So, and here the vulnerability we see is not just that the girl wanted to travel, but the point is that she didn't ask any question to her friend. She didn't ask, okay, who I will work for? What is the salary? What are the working conditions? Where will I live? So she didn't ask any question. Also, this is connected to the age. So there are many different issues at stake here. Then other factors. I know that time is running. I don't know if we had 75 minutes, but apparently time is running a lot. So we try to go a bit faster. So maybe
thank you very much, Carlota, because you have 10 minutes left also for the questions. So that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we try to conclude with a few other hints. In this slide, I'm showing you the factors, so the vulnerabilities that are in place, especially in the exploitation phase. We have many factors. I would like just to discuss the first one. So in case we can obviously go back to the slide if you have any curiosity. What we found is, for example, that violence is used, and this is something we already know. There is huge of data. UNODC released a lot of data regarding the violence committed by traffickers on the victims. But it's also interesting to acknowledge that threats, psychological threats, are playing a very important role. Especially in victims of sex trafficking, they are often threatened by traffickers that they will share with their families or with their friends or boyfriends pictures portraying them in sexual activities. And this is something that impede victims to get out, to exit trafficking, because of a sense of shame that they would feel in case their family or friends receive these pictures. So for many victims, it's even impossible just to think about exiting trafficking for that reason. So there is not just violence, but there are many other forms of violence and that oblige victims to stay, let's say, trapped in this crime. As you can see, for example, this girl told us, they told me they had videos. I could not think about my family, how they would react and what they would do. I was afraid of my father who had problems with his heart. So also some of the victims are really worried about the possible reaction also in terms of health. I will skip the other factors. I would like to discuss briefly the protective factors related to the victims. Actually, as also Elite, if I'm pronouncing correctly, was saying about her research that she's in a preliminary stage. This is valid also for us. So we didn't find many protective factors, but still we had gathered some hints on that. So first of all, what we found is that a very important protective factor that help victims to escape trafficking is having strong links with the family and friends. This is something that we gathered already from the literature, but what we found that according to me was interesting is that this is not valid just for the family and friends that they had in their countries of origins, but also is valid also for new friends. For example, there was a victim who told us that she was actually rescued by the police. So she didn't want, or she wasn't able to escape before. She had many, let's say, she was frightened of her traffickers, so she wasn't able to escape. She was rescued by police and put in a juvenile center. And at the beginning, she told her that she was quite skeptical about the other people in the juvenile center. She didn't get along with anyone. She didn't like kids, and this place was full of kids. So, and she continuously thinking about her perpetrator. We were not sure whether she was in love with the perpetrator, but she mentioned she wanted to go back to him. In the end, she told us that she was able to make connections with the people in the juvenile center. So over time, she got along with all the people, and this was the reason why she didn't escape from the juvenile center, which is, according to me, an interesting factor.
Lotta, may I ask you to get to the conclusion, because we have questions popping up and we have
sure. Sure. Just to mention, so for what concerns perpetrators, we have also we have found some factors that are basically that we would like to explore more. For example, vulnerabilities that regard perpetrators are having a high economic gain. We know that THB is a very high reward activity, is a low risk, and this is also confirmed by recent data on dropping global convictions on THB provided by UNODC. Being in a situation of poverty, being under threat by other traffickers, having been exploited before, or having previous links with organized crime, as well as street gangs. This is something on which we are working, and we would like also to gather more information. And so far, we didn't find any protective factor related to the perpetrators. To conclude, I just wanted to mention that in this project, just to provide you the overall overview, we are also developing some technologies and solutions, as I said at the beginning, for identifying and detecting and preventing THB. We are basically developing a suite of tools in order to prevent trafficking, but also other solutions that will first of all, make available knowledge on THB. They will increase collaboration on THB among different stakeholders, including law enforcement agencies, but also NGOs, and also raise awareness on these issues, especially among young generations. If you want to know more, we have this is a slide just to show you some examples of technologies we have been developing, because we are still in the development phase. I was very happy to be here and to have this opportunity to present the research we are conducting. If you have any question, I will be more than happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Carlotta. It's a very, very interesting study and project, and I also directly checked the project site when you started to introduce it, and it's quite promising. So I already want to share one of the questions popped up in the meantime of Carl, who is thanking for the presentation. His question is, on the technology aspect, what system software do you use for your research?
You mean for the empirical research or for the technologies we are developing in the project?
The question was still before you started to talk about the solutions. So I think the assumption was for the data collection part, so the empirical
I mean,
part.
the data collection. Yeah, the data collection mainly stems from interviews. So we are not using specific technologies. We are not using technologies to gather, let's say, quantitative data. So I'm not sure if the person who asked the question had in mind, for example, gathering data from the dark web or scraping websites to detect websites for potential recruitment. This is something we are basically doing on the surface web, mainly while developing the technologies. So we will develop technologies that will be able to scrape websites and to detect websites that are potentially used for recruitment, but also exploitation, like advertisement of services, for example, sexual services. But for what concerns the empirical research, in terms of data gathering, we are relying on semi-structured interviews. So I don't know if you have, if you want to know more, if you want to ask more specific questions on these, I can obviously answer.
You said, quoting you, you are developing systems other than site scraping. What about other software?
What about other software? The other software we are developing in the project, you mean?
I assume that this is about the developed systems you are referring to.
Okay. So in this case, we are developing different technologies. So the one I mentioned you before is the one that will be active online. Parallel to that, we are also developing technologies that will be able to process not only text gathered from, extracted from the websites, but also tools that will be able to analyze and process audio files, for example, or videos. Parallel to that, we are developing tools that will be able to analyze and recognize emotions and that will analyze body posture and will produce risk assessment. Will produce, let's say, risk indicators to try to understand the extent to which certain emotions could be connected to trafficking in human beings. By analyzing all these emotions and attitudes, let's say. Parallel to that, we are also developing tools for the remote detection of human subjects in cargos. So these tools will be able to detect the potential presence of human subjects in cargos or in cars, for example. Even if they are covered.
Thank you, Carlotta. I'm very sorry, but I have to interrupt you because we need to close our 24-hour marathon.
Don't worry, but just to say to the person that if you want to know more information, you can reach me out via email. I can just drop my email address.
Thank you so much. And I truly hope that next year we will continue on behavioral biometrics, because I'm sure that that's also a very important part of technological aspects of organized crime. Thank you for everyone who have been participating in this panel, for the organizers, for the support team, and for the speakers, especially for the very interesting contributions. And I think it's time to close our 24 hours exchange and hope to see you soon in the next year. Thank you for all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
I could just make a few closing remarks before you all go off. I'd like to thank everyone for being part of this 5th edition of the 24-hour conference on global organised crime. As we wrap up this incredible 24-hour journey, I'd like to take a few moments to reflect on what we've accomplished together.
This year's conference was built on a simple yet ambitious idea. Can we truly host a global event with participants from 6 continents and more than 40 countries in just one day? The answer is, as we have seen, yes, a resounding yes. With over 3,000 participants joining from around the world, our panel sessions saw an average audience of around 40 participants each. Together, we hosted 320 speakers from diverse backgrounds, from academia to civil society, early career scholars to experienced professionals, all with a unique voice. We took an important step to promoting gender balance and are expanding our perspectives with discussions from different regions and different subdisciplines and disciplines. Our commitment to innovation continued this year with new formats like documentary screenings and book presentations that have inspired meaningful exchanges and new ideas. Thanks to the hard work of our communications and logistics team at the Global Initiative and our incredible group of volunteers who made everything run very, very smoothly this year, this virtual format allowed us to gather insights, build connections, and foster a spirit of collaboration that few in-person conferences can match. I would like to especially thank those speakers who have adjusted their schedules to join us at all hours in the last 24 hours, showing their commitments to this global international conversation. To our behind-the-scenes teams, your dedication was invaluable. You kept things running seamlessly, ensuring that everyone could engage in this very shared experience. But the end of this conference does not mark the end of our journey together. We encourage you to carry them on the momentum forward by connecting with the speakers and the participants you found engaging. Soon we'll be posting recordings and resources from the sessions on our website. You'll also receive a survey where we'd love to hear your feedback and ideas for the future and how we can improve the formula. And finally, we'd invite you to join one of our networks: the International Association for the Study of Organised Crime, the Centre for Information and Research of Organised Crime, or the ECPR Standing Group on Organised Crime, of which I'm a member, so that we can carry on to collaborate on addressing the global challenges that organised crime face, or addressing the challenges that organised crime give us every day in every different part of our life and world. So thank you for making this conference such a remarkable success. I hope it's given you lots of ideas, but also energy. And I hope it has been as inspiring for you as it has been for us. So thank you very much from everybody, and hope to see you again soon.